technology in Austria. As part of his job, he teaches energy economics, regulation, and competition in energy markets, and he specializes in energy modeling. He's got four focuses of his research program at the moment: evaluation and modeling of dissemination strategies for renewables, modeling paths towards sustainable energy systems, the liberalization versus the regulation of energy markets, and finally, energy policy strategies. And he's worked in all these fields for over 30 years, and he's got more than 100 papers on it. And he's also worked with, on coordinates projects for the Austrian government and Austrian institutions, as well as the European Commission and the International Energy Agency. And today, he's going to tell us about prospects and impediments for sustainable hydrogen-based energy systems, something I'd love to hear about. So Reinhard, please take it away.
Thanks a lot, Bas. I would have appreciated much more to be in Boston, at MIT in Cambridge, but now I'm here in Vienna and it's almost in the evening, and it's a pleasure for me to share with you our ideas regarding the prospects for this future hydrogen-based energy system. My focus is, as you have already mentioned, on energy economics, so also my presentation will largely be focusing on this. I will first shortly present the motivation. I will go slightly back to history and present some of the ideas, visions of hydrogen economy. I will give a short survey on the technologies, and then I will come to my major points regarding costs and economics. Regarding environment, there is currently a discussion of colors of hydrogen. Scenarios, technological learning could show us how to go into the future, and this has to be supported, accompanied by policy strategies. Finally, I would also shortly discuss what if hydrogen is not the solution? What if hydrogen is not really feasible? This could also be the idea, and conclusions will complete my presentation. The motivation is clear. We have Paris agreements reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and there is an urgent need for clean energy carriers. We have, on the other hand, currently a strong development of variable renewables in the electricity system, and here storage is needed. And hydrogen is widely seen as such a clean energy carrier, but since decades, but so far hydrogen has not delivered. So core objectives: to analyze the prospects and the impediments of the hydrogen-based system, to identify the role of hydrogen to integrate even larger amounts of the variable renewables, to analyze how efficient technical solutions based on hydrogen can be, that is to say, what is the overall efficiency in different hydrogen energy systems, invest economic prospects, as said, also environmental benignity of various colors of the hydrogen. Most of you will know the story of Jules Verne from the year 1874 in the mysterious island, when he said, "I believe that water will one day be employed as fuel, that hydrogen and oxygen will constitute it, used singly or together, an alternative to coal." And this was in the year 1874 about. Already 1766, hydrogen was identified as a distinct element, and about 1838 already the fuel cell effect was discovered. The first fuel cell vehicle was a farm tractor in 1959. In 2011, there were already about 100 fuel cell buses worldwide, and in 2019, we had a global fuel cell vehicle stock of 13,000. And I would say this is not really a success story. The vision of the hydrogen society, for example, in Germany already in 1984, it started with hydrogen from nuclear. So the idea was that there's too much electricity generated in the nuclear power plant and they could use the electricity in electrolysis, and the further discussion is the same as today. And already in 1986, there was an additional idea to go to the desert, for example, in Africa, Northern Africa, produce electricity there and produce hydrogen and transport it, for example, to Germany. Jeremy Rifkin was, I think, the guy who really provided a very comprehensive and nice idea of the hydrogen economy in 2002. And he wrote, "The road to global security lies in lessening our dependence on oil," and so on. And he stated the red part here in the slide: "The hydrogen economy presents the clearest, most comprehensive case for moving ourselves away from the destructive and warning years of the oil era." So he was convinced that hydrogen contributes to a cleaner, safer, and more sustainable world. Another interesting idea came from the European Union. In the year 2003, they created a roadmap starting in the year 2000 with fuel-based economy heading towards 2050, hydrogen-oriented. So there is, of course, a small mistake, because coal, fossil fuels is, let's say, a primary energy source, and hydrogen is an energy carrier which has to be produced from other primary sources. For the year 2020, it was already expected that there would be an interconnection of local hydrogen distribution grids. And in addition, there was the idea in 2020 we should have low-cost, high-temperature fuel cell systems and vehicles would competitive for passenger car transport. So maybe only a slight deviation. The vision of such a hydrogen-based energy system is shown here in this slide: an integrated energy system of the future. It combines large and small fuel cells for domestic and decentralized heat and electric power generation, and finally provides the fuel for the fuel cell vehicles. And CO2 here is from the fossil-based hydrogen production, which is not completely neglected. Today, hydrogen is mainly used in refineries and for producing ammonia, and about 70% of hydrogen are produced from natural gas, only 5% from electricity. So let's now look at the hydrogen technologies. We have to bear in mind that we have technologies for hydrogen production, for hydrogen storage, and finally distribution, application in services. So we can see here we can produce hydrogen from biomass, other renewables, but also from nuclear and from fossil fuels with carbon sequestration. That is to say, if we discuss the technologies, we have to bear in mind this whole chain from production, transport, storage, and also the applications. Just a rough overview. You must not read what we have on this table. It just shows that there are many possible processes. We have thermal processes such as steam reforming, gasification. We have electrochemical ones, such as electrolysis, photoelectrochemical, and there are also biological processes possible. Let's now look, first example, hydrogen as storage for electricity. In an electrolyzer, we produce the hydrogen and put it by compression in a hydrogen storage. Then we have the opportunity for re-electrification of this hydrogen. If we look at the different efficiencies in the system, finally we end up at about 27 to 38%, which is, let's say, at least modest. So round trip efficiency for electricity in this case would be rather low. Another opportunity is in transport. Aside from using the electricity directly for electric vehicles, we can have the hydrogen storage and drive the fuel cell vehicle. And finally, we also have the opportunity to do something that is called methanization of hydrogen. We produce methane for mobility, for example, or for electrification. Again, in this case here, we have an efficiency which is even lower than before because we have an additional conversion step. Let's now come to the costs of hydrogen. On the left-hand side here, we have current costs. On the right side, we have future costs. We have on the left side first steam reforming, which is currently the dominant technology, as I've shown before, large and small. And we have next electrolysis, also large and small. The black bars are from our calculations. The bars in total are, for example, on literature published by the International Energy Agency and other institutions. So what we can see is that today the costs of production for steam reforming are still lower than electrolysis, and they are lower in the large plants. I will show later that we have actually significant economies of scale with respect to hydrogen production. On the right side, you can see that for the future, there's no decrease in the costs by steam reforming to expect, no significant, but we think that electrolyzers will, due to technological learning, become cheaper, and so will become the hydrogen production. Now, we know in several countries, in the United States, in many states in the European Union, also as a total, variable renewables gain market shares, and the situation in the European Union is that since about 2013, renewable energy is the dominating energy carrier. It's no more an alternative energy. It is, let's say, in the meantime, the mainstream energy. But we have already heard in several other presentations, if we have the fluctuating production, then the picture is as shown here. Over a week, in this case for 2030 in a scenario, we have demand and we have times where the renewable generation is higher than demand, and we have other times where renewable production is lower. So we have to find for a week a certain storage. But if we look at the balance over a year, we have the long-term balance in mind. And this means in this case here in summertime, especially if we have high quantities from photovoltaics, and I think in California this discussion has been much more popular in the last even 10 years, So we have to find a solution for storing this excess electricity. If we classify residual load over years, we have here the classical profile for 2016 and an expected profile for 2030. We have here under coverage in some periods of time, and in other periods of time we have a surplus due to excess generation. And the question now is, how do we use this surplus? We have several options. As also already said, we discussed the extension of transmission grid. This will flatten demand as well as generation curve. Then there is a possibility of shedding some peaks of plants, for example, of wind power plants. And we have maybe rather low prices. Then due to direct marketing, some of this excess electricity will be sold. Technical demand-side management as well as the smart grids could help to balance from one voltage level to another one. And then here we have maybe the use of hydrogen storage. But now we come to one of the very crucial points. It is full load hour. If you think about economics, the costs highly depend on the number of hours you operate the system. So here we have on the horizontal axis the full load hours, and we have different types of storage. Usually battery storage has lowest operation times, especially decentralized ones, and for hydrogen we would expect at least, let's say, 1,500 to 3,000 full load hours. And in addition, this shows that at very low operation times of, let's say, 500, we have correspondingly rather high euro or dollars per kilowatt hour generation cost. Another important issue is that here we have on the horizontal axis the capacity of the electrolyzer in kilowatt goes up to here 3,500, and we can see that we have something like considerable economies of scale. That is to say, the small systems are rather much more expensive than the large ones. And the gray curve here shows total production costs depending on the capacity. That is to say, it's not just the electrolysis, it's also other components of this system. Now we try to identify finally the conditions for the price, for minimizing the price of hydrogen. And to do so, we have here again the full load hours on the horizontal axis, and then we have the blue curve showing marginal costs over here in a specific market. This is a Western European market, French, German. It doesn't matter which region we look at. It also is different from year to year, but we can now calculate the average costs, which are the average of the prices below a certain number of full load hours. For example, here at 4,000 full load hours, we can identify electricity costs of average 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And I think there's not much difference between US cent and Euro cent. This is an important possible impact. Here we have now the blue curve showing these costs of the electricity, and the red curve shows investment costs. So investment costs decrease with full load hours, and the green curve shows total costs of this system. It is, in this case, the example of a 2 megawatt plant. If we just have here 1,500 full load hours, the costs are 25 cents per kilowatt hour. If we would manage to come to 4,000 kilowatt hours, the costs would only be about 10 cents. So we can see we have significantly lower costs in the case of a more full load hours using. Now we can try to identify the economics based on these costs for car transport. And what we see from this slide is the fuel cell vehicle is on the top. Below we have battery electric vehicles, we have gasoline, internal combustion engine at the bottom. What you see is that the fuel costs of hydrogen are actually here in the average of everything, but the capital costs are still the major problem. So the economics in passenger car transport mainly depends on the investment costs. Next, I have already mentioned this issue of color of hydrogen. Of course, this is kind of a, let's say, joke. And the idea is that the environmental benignity is depending on whether hydrogen is green. Green means it's just from renewable energy sources. It could be blue, which means it is from natural gas. There's also an idea of turquoise, and sometimes the definition is different, having this CO2 sequestration. And at the end, we have, let's say, gray hydrogen. That is to say, we do not know from which source it is produced. It might be even from coal. So comparing again different types of car. Here on the top, we have fuel cell vehicles with hydrogen from renewables. And the red bar shows well-to-wheel, considering also the production emissions of the car. And we can see that here we have quite favorable circumstances. On the top, fuel cell vehicles from renewables, and 2 lines beyond, we have battery electric vehicles from renewable energy sources. But if we go to the second bar, we have natural gas blue. That is to say, fuel cell vehicles with blue hydrogen based on the production of hydrogen from steam reforming from natural gas. And then we have significantly higher emissions, and the emissions are not very much better in this case than from other conventional vehicles. That is to say, in principle, if we look at these environmental aspects, it is highly important that we strive for having it from the renewable energy sources. Currently, there are different applications, new applications underway. Currently, the largest electrolysis plant is built in Hamburg in Germany, from my knowledge, with about 100 megawatts. And it produces 2 tons of hydrogen per hour. Next, we have the examples of the hydrogen buses. I think all over the world experiments are made. We have steam, we have hydrogen locomotives to supply areas without grid connection with environmentally friendly train. And we have also the ideas for hydrogen making ship transport more environmentally benign, reducing here the greenhouse gas emissions. These are all examples which are underway and are, I would say, currently continuously disseminated over at least the richer countries. So next we come to what I call scenarios and technological learning. So in this slide, we have made some assumptions for, on the top, small systems, on the bottom, large systems. And the unit here is euro per kilowatt investment costs. So for BOSS, we have low and high cases of learning rates. For low learning rates, they are about 15%, high learning rates about 22%. And you can see what we can expect based on some IEA figures for quantities, how these investment costs will develop. And of course, based on the investment costs, we can now calculate the kilowatt hour price. What are the costs per kilowatt hour? And we have used the figure I have shown before of 2 cents per kilowatt hour electricity for this calculation. And in addition, the technological learning developments. So the result here is that by 2030, we might be at about 12 to 17, 18 cents, and by 2050, maybe in the case of a large system, even beyond 10 cents per kilowatt hour. If we consider this, we will have in 2050, with simultaneous technological learning of the fuel cell vehicle, the cost effectiveness for fuel cell vehicles. So this just considers the single types of vehicles, and it does not consider whether we will have other policies, for example, emission-free zones in the cities, and some countries even discuss bans of the diesel vehicles. So the major conclusion from this slide is that by 2050, several types of vehicles can have almost the same costs. But we need kind of policies, otherwise we would have already a quite large market penetration of hydrogen. And it is of interest to see which strategies and targets exist in different countries. Quite recently, we had in the European Union on 10 June 2020 launched a hydrogen strategy with the objective to decarbonize existing hydrogen production for current uses and to build also large electrolyzers up to 2030. China has launched a hydrogen strategy in 2019 with focus on hydrogen buses, trucks, and the country intends that hydrogen will account for 10% of the Chinese energy system by 2040. You in the US, you have since the 1970s, I think, hydrogen strategies and targets. It was, I think, started mainly in California. And last in this series, Germany announced in June 2020 a budget of about euro 9 billion for the promotion of hydrogen. And what is a specific point of interest, Germany wants to do it in a strong connection with Morocco. So I come to my last two slides, and this is what if not. So I think many countries are currently betting on hydrogen, putting a lot of money on hydrogen. But what if finally, what are finally ultimately the lasting advantages of hydrogen in comparison to electricity expected? So far, as I said, hydrogen has not delivered. And there could be a technology surprise turnout to win, or even electricity. I have shown you the chain of hydrogen from generation to providing the service to the use. but for the use, the technology, I would say, are not really major and are also not really available. I think in many countries, for example, stationary fuel cells were in larger quantities available 10 years ago than today. And then there is a discussion to use hydrogen for several industrial processes, for iron and steel production, but there is no major technology available to put this immediately into practice. The overall conversion efficiencies of the system overall are moderate. The environmental benignity takes place only under specific conditions, and I have tried to show this for electricity. So if you have the variable electricity from renewables, you have the problem of low full load hours. If you want to have better economics, increase full load hours, you may also use other sources for electricity generation. The overall costs are still high, and as said, the economics has still to be proven. This leads to the conclusions, which are rather questions. As already mentioned, are the technologies ready? This is quite an open question. Another open question is how to produce a huge quantity of renewable electricity. If we really want to have a hydrogen-based system, we cannot just take the excess electricity. We have to have a mainstream program to use the renewable sources. Another idea is that we could again try to import hydrogen. As I said, the German examples, they want to have the cooperation with Morocco and Africa. But if we want to rely on hydrogen imports, from which countries does it make sense? Third issue is we are striving for competitive energy markets, and we are striving especially for competitive electricity markets, in addition also for more democracy in the markets. But can hydrogen survive in such a system, or is it necessary that the regulators interfere? Another point is the role of a CO2 price, different in different continents and countries. Then we have the issue of infrastructure. Of course, in principle, not very cheap new infrastructure will be needed, but partly maybe the existing one for the natural gas grid could be used. However, is also to be discussed. Finally, we have this term of energy transition. In Germany, it's called Energiewende. And we think that this transition needs a broad portfolio of supply and demand side technologies. And in this context, the question is picking winners justified? If we bet on the hydrogen as energy carrier, it's kind of such a picking winner strategy. And finally, we have to discuss what are the ultimate lasting advantages of hydrogen, for example, in comparison to electricity. These questions complete my presentation, and I'm happy now to enter an interesting discussion.
Reinhard, thank you very much. That was wonderfully fascinating. I think we've got about 6 minutes for questions, and I see that Mike Aziz has already put one up. And he asks, what's the least costly hydrogen storage method at large scale? And what do you estimate its cost to be?
I think the best way would actually be to avoid storing hydrogen for a long time. And the best way would have to have pipelines which produce immediately the hydrogen and bring it, for example, to the hydrogen buses. So we are currently trying such a project in practice with a bus line, and we try to avoid the storage of hydrogen. So in principle, the costs are about, let's say, 20% of the generation in the best case, but there are various experiments underway. And in the commercial situations, there are not many really practical projects. So I would have to go more into the detail to really answer this question more precise.
Oh my gosh. Mike, if that, I hope that answered your question. I guess the answer is it's complicated.
And you should avoid to store it too long.
I see. So I don't want to ask sort of like a leading question, but I guess I will. Does that mean that hydrogen isn't really a practical technology for long, say, month or annual energy storage?
I think you have to try to optimize the system, because you also have losses in the storage, you have losses for the transport. So this is one of the major goals currently when making the practical experiments to find an overall solution for the system. And it also depends finally on the final application. So in the iron and steel industry, they try to produce the hydrogen on site and use it as immediately as possible, as soon as possible.
Oh, and is that just because hydrogen storage is intrinsically a difficult proposition because of the porosity of most materials to hydrogen?
Now, I think the problem is also that you have losses. If you store it, you have losses, and the longer you store it, the higher are the losses.
Oh my gosh. So Julie comes up with a question as well. And he asks, could you, just to follow up on this, could you comment on the prospect of, seasonal or even multi-year hydrogen storage? I get the impression from that last answer that it's difficult.
I think it is difficult, and as I said, I would prefer really not to have it stored for a year or something like that. This is the approach that is currently pursued. But what I also said is you have this problem of, let's say, full load hours, and from my point of view, it's the largest problem. So the storage in principle are available, but we have to look to bring down further the costs, and we also have to look down to bring down the losses and to increase the overall efficiency of this storage.
I see.
So you have also this type of filling station, and filling station, yeah, they are a storage for the electricity, for the hydrogen from the electricity.
I see. So you would be more in favor of say overbuilding capacity rather than
yes,
rather than building storage.
I think so. Yes.
I see. I got it. So we've got a couple of minutes left. And if there are any more short questions, I'd love to hear them. I have a quick one for you. In the last couple of minutes, you talked about surprises, and I guess by their nature, surprises are unexpected, but what hydrogen surprises would you like to see?
Now, I think the surprise should go in the research direction. That is to say, I had the idea by using electricity for hydrogen, and why not directly trying to research on technologies using the electricity. And maybe we can also find other ways for methanization. With respect to hydrogen, I think the most important aspect would really be to find solutions in the overall system which reduces these losses. So I have shown if you make this and that times as much conversion processes from solar to electricity, from electricity to hydrogen, storing hydrogen, transporting hydrogen, bringing it back to the power plant again, and then converting it again into electricity. This is such a long chain that the losses are, let's say, almost incredible, but it is, from my point of view, not proper for a future energy system to have these high quantities of losses.
I got it. That was fantastic. So we better wrap it up with your presentation now. So thank you very much. And we're going to move on.
Thank you for chairing the session.
Thank you for coming.
It was a great
Thanks for staying up late as well. We're going to move